Under the dazzling chandeliers of the Ritz London, Jennifer Aniston stood in the center of the grand ballroom, draped in a silver satin gown, flawless from every seam to the delicate crystals adorning its fabric. Tonight was supposed to be the most important night of her life, the engagement party between her and Andrew Caldwell, the man she believed she would build a perfect future with. Classical music floated through the air, weaving between cheerful conversations. Champagne shimmered in crystal glasses as London's elite raised their toasts. Jennifer could feel the expectant gazes of her parents, Richard and Evelyn Aniston, who had arranged this marriage not just for love, but for the merging of two powerful families. The ballroom doors suddenly swung open. She turned, heart racing. Andrew had arrived, but he wasn't alone. He walked in hand with Olivia Pierce, the daughter of one of England's most powerful financial moguls. Jennifer froze. A murmur spread across the room. Everyone seemed to understand what was happening, except for her. Andrew met her gaze, his expression cold, indifferent, as if she had never meant anything to him. Tightening his grip on Olivia's hand, he declared for all to hear, "Jennifer, I can't marry you. Olivia is my future." A heavy silence fell over the ballroom. Jennifer felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. The champagne flute in her hand slipped through her fingers, crashing onto the marble floor, shattering into countless glittering shards. The sound echoed through the suffocating quiet. She searched Andrew's face for hesitation, for some flicker of regret, for any sign that this was some cruel joke, that he couldn't possibly be doing this to her. But all she saw was absolute indifference. Then the whispers started. Poor thing. Did she really not know? How humiliating. The air felt too thick, the walls too close. Everything around Jennifer blurred. Whether from shock or the tears she refused to shed, she wasn't sure. But the final blow didn't come from Andrew. It came from her own family. Evelyn Aniston, the mother who valued reputation above all else, stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but it cut like a knife. "You've humiliated us." Richard Aniston merely turned away, as if she had ceased to exist. And in that moment, Jennifer realized she had not only lost her fiancé, she had lost her family, too. She couldn't stay there a second longer. There was no one left on her side. With trembling hands and a shattered heart, she turned and fled from the Ritz, the London rain pouring down on her as she disappeared into the night. The London rain poured down in icy sheets, cutting through Jennifer's thin satin dress. She walked aimlessly through the cobbled streets of Mayfair, her high heels sinking into the slippery cracks between the stones. Golden lights from upscale cafes reflected off the wet pavement, but to her, they were nothing more than meaningless blurs. Each step she took felt like another blade slicing into her heart. She had lost everything: her fiancé, her dignity, her family. In one night, the life she thought was perfect had crumbled like a sandcastle swept away by the tide. The engagement ring still sat on her finger, a cruel reminder of Andrew's empty promises. She lifted her hand and stared at it, a surge of anger bubbling up inside her. Was it all just a joke? Without hesitation, she yanked the ring off her finger and hurled it onto the pavement. It rolled away, disappearing into the dirty stream of rainwater trickling down the curb. She felt no regret. A sharp gust of wind blew past, but she didn't feel it anymore. All she could hear was her mother's voice echoing in her head. "You've humiliated us." Why was it always about reputation, about appearances, about business deals? Why had no one cared about how she felt? Jennifer clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. She couldn't go home, couldn't bear to face the disappointment in her parents' eyes. She needed to disappear. Somewhere, no one knew who she was. Lifting her gaze, she spotted a dimly lit neon sign flickering in the rain. The Rusty Anchor Pub and Whiskey Bar. She had never stepped foot in a place like this before. Her nights had always been spent in Michelin-starred restaurants in Knightsbridge or elegant cocktail parties in Chelsea. But right now, none of that mattered. The wooden door groaned as she pushed it open. A mix of whiskey, tobacco, and the low rumble of laughter filled the air. No one recognized her. No one cared that she was Jennifer Aniston of Aniston Enterprises. Good. She walked straight to the bar, pulled out a wooden stool, and sat down. Her hands trembled as she met the bartender's gaze and spoke, her voice hoarse and raw. "Whiskey, neat." The bartender, an old man with a scruffy silver beard, studied her for a moment, but said nothing. He simply poured the amber liquid into a glass and slid it toward her. Jennifer picked up the glass, watching the whiskey glisten under the dim lighting. Without thinking, she downed it in one gulp. The liquor burned her throat, searing through her chest, but at least for a moment, it dulled the pain. Jennifer slammed her whiskey glass onto the bar, exhaling sharply. The burn in her throat remained, but it didn't ease the ache in her chest. She gestured to the bartender for another drink, her voice hoarse. "Another one." The bartender hesitated for a second, maybe debating whether he should refuse her, but then quietly refilled her glass. Jennifer lifted it, staring into the amber liquid before letting out a bitter chuckle. "He left me, in front of everyone." She hadn't expected anyone to listen, but she spoke anyway. "He walked in holding another woman's hand. At our engagement party, and in front of hundreds of guests, he told me he couldn't marry me." She smirked, her eyes burning from both the whiskey and the humiliation. "The worst part? My parents weren't angry at him. They were angry at me for embarrassing them." Jennifer scoffed, shaking her head. "So there you have it. I lost everything in one night. My fiancé, my family, my dignity, and now I'm sitting here drinking whiskey like it's gonna fix anything." She raised the glass to her lips, but before she could take a sip, a deep voice spoke from beside her. "You need a husband. I'm available." Jennifer blinked. She turned, frowning at the stranger. He sat 2 stools away, tousled brown hair, a worn leather jacket, and deep blue eyes that seemed to hold too many secrets. His expression was unreadable. He wasn't joking, wasn't smiling. He had simply said it as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "What?" The man lifted his beer, took a slow sip, then shrugged. "If you need a husband, I'm right here." Jennifer stared at him for a moment before laughing, a hollow, cynical laugh. "Are you serious?" He tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. "I've got nothing better to do tonight, and you just lost everything. A spontaneous marriage probably wouldn't be the craziest thing you've done today." Jennifer studied him. A stranger, a ridiculous offer. She should have walked away. Any sane person would. But instead, she smirked, raising her whiskey glass in a mock toast. "All right, stranger, marry me." The man set his beer down, stood up, and extended a hand. "Jack Morgan." Jennifer took it. His grip was warm, firm. "Jennifer." Jack's lips curved slightly, his gaze glinting with something unreadable. "Well then, future wife of mine, let's go." The rain outside was still pouring, but Jennifer no longer cared. They ran into the London night, through the dimly lit streets, their laughter mixing with the sound of raindrops hitting the pavement. Jennifer's silver dress clung to her skin, soaked through, but she barely noticed. For the first time in hours, she felt weightless. Jack led her down a winding alley, then stopped in front of a building with a dull yellow glow emanating from inside. Jennifer squinted at the sign above the door. "Westminster Register Office, Marriage Registration." She burst out laughing. "You're actually serious about this?" Jack just shrugged, pulling her inside. An old clerk sat behind a wooden desk, peering at them over thick glasses. He looked unimpressed as he took in their disheveled, rain-soaked appearance. "What do you want?" he asked in a bored tone. Jack grinned. His voice was steady, almost too confident. "We want to get married." 15 minutes later, Jennifer held a pen in her hand, staring down at the marriage certificate in front of her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she signed her name. Jennifer Aniston. She glanced at Jack, who was watching her with a bemused expression as he signed his own name beneath hers. Jennifer let out a breath, leaning back. "I can't believe I just did that." Jack smirked, slipping the cheap silver wedding ring onto her finger. "Too late now, Mrs. Morgan." Jennifer shook her head, half laughing, half in shock. I'm definitely going to regret this. Jack winked. Then let's enjoy it before the regret kicks in. And just like that, with a free ring from the clerk's desk and a blurry signature on a piece of paper, Jennifer Aniston, former heiress of Aniston Enterprises, became Mrs. Morgan. She had no idea what she had just done. But maybe, for tonight, that didn't matter. Jennifer woke up with a pounding headache. The bed beneath her was too firm, the blanket too thin, and the air too cold. A breeze crept through the cracks in the window, carrying the damp scent of a London morning mixed with coffee? She groaned, shifting slightly, only to realize that nothing around her was familiar. This wasn't her penthouse in Chelsea. Her eyes fluttered open. The ceiling was cracked, a rusty ceiling fan creaked overhead, and light filtered through old curtains. Everything about this place felt small, old, and foreign. Jennifer tried to sit up, but the sudden movement made nausea rise in her stomach. She pressed a hand to her temple, trying to recall what had happened the night before. And then she saw it. A cheap silver ring on her finger. Her heart stopped. No way. A clinking sound came from across the room. Jennifer turned her head, her pulse quickening. Jack Morgan stood in the tiny kitchenette, his back to her, moving casually as he poured coffee into a chipped mug. He wore a simple gray t-shirt, his brown hair slightly tousled, looking completely at ease. Like waking up married to a stranger was the most normal thing in the world. He turned, catching her stunned expression. A slow smirk tugged at his lips. Finally awake, wifey? Jennifer stiffened. Don't call me that. Jack only chuckled, setting the coffee mug down onto the small wooden table. Don't remember much, do you? Jennifer rubbed her temples, fragments of last night rushing back. The bar, the whiskey, the rain, the insane proposal, the wedding registry in Westminster. Her voice was quieter when she finally asked, "Did we actually get married?" Jack crossed his arms, leaning against the kitchen counter. If that signature on the marriage certificate is yours, then yeah, we did. Jennifer inhaled sharply. Oh my God. Her gaze darted around the apartment, a tiny cramped space with a single bed, a wobbly wardrobe, a scratched wooden table, and a kitchen barely big enough for one person. No crystal chandeliers, no large windows overlooking the Thames, no gourmet breakfast waiting on a silver tray. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a catastrophe. Jack lifted his coffee, taking a slow sip before speaking. Welcome to East End, Jennifer Morgan. Jennifer froze. She wasn't Jennifer Aniston of Aniston Enterprises anymore. She was now Jennifer Morgan, married to a complete stranger, living in a rundown flat in one of London's working-class neighborhoods. And worst of all, she was completely, utterly broke. The next few days were hell. Jennifer had to face a reality she had never known before, a life without money, without luxury, without convenience. She could no longer press a button on her phone and have gourmet meals delivered to her door. Now she had to cook for herself, which was a disaster. The first morning she attempted to make eggs, Jack stood by the counter, watching with mild amusement. Tilt the pan a little. No, not that much. Jennifer yelped as the egg slid out of the pan and onto the stove. She groaned, dropping the spatula onto the counter. This is ridiculous. You do it. Jack smirked. But this is much more entertaining. Jennifer glared at him. If cooking was bad, laundry was worse. She had never used a washing machine in her life. The first time she tried, she almost flooded the building's basement. Jack had leaned against the doorway, shaking his head. Didn't think laundry would be a life or death situation for you. She had thrown a towel at him. But the hardest part? Shopping. Jennifer had never set foot in a regular supermarket before. She had always shopped at high-end organic markets with imported produce. Now she stood in the middle of a budget grocery store, holding a bottle of cheap water Jack had handed her. She frowned. Why this one? Jack glanced at her, his blue eyes glinting with amusement. Because it costs 50p instead of £5 sterling. You're not a rich heiress anymore, remember? Jennifer's cheeks burned, but she didn't argue. She was learning, slowly, how to survive in a world she had never belonged to. But amidst all the struggles, one thing became increasingly clear to Jennifer. Jack Morgan wasn't as simple as he seemed. At first glance, he was just a laid-back guy living paycheck to paycheck. But there were things about him that didn't add up. The way he brewed coffee like an expert. The way he talked about aircraft engines with an alarming level of knowledge. Jack Morgan wasn't just some ordinary guy from East End. And Jennifer was beginning to wonder, who exactly had she married? Jennifer stood in the small apartment, holding one of Jack's wrinkled shirts, attempting to fold it neatly. She had been here for a week now, slowly adapting to this life. One without luxury, without wealth, without privilege. Jack had left early for work that morning, leaving her alone in this tiny space that was slowly starting to feel familiar. She opened the desk drawer, searching for a pair of scissors. But instead, her fingers brushed against something unexpected. A newspaper, old and slightly yellowed with age. Her heart pounded as she pulled it out and read the bold headline. Jackson Everett, writer of The Missing Heir of Ryder Aviation. Jennifer's breath caught in her throat. She scanned the article. 3 years ago, Jackson Ryder, the sole heir to Ryder Aviation, one of Europe's largest aerospace companies, vanished after a massive financial scandal. His father, Harold Ryder, had been accused of embezzling millions, sending the company into chaos. Under the weight of public scrutiny, Jackson disappeared. And now here he was, living in a tiny East End apartment, calling himself Jack Morgan and married to her. Jennifer's breath hitched. Her fingers clenched the newspaper, crumpling its edges. She wasn't breathing. Just then, the door opened. Jack stepped in, shaking the rain from his jacket. But the moment he saw her face, he froze. "What's wrong?" Jennifer clenched the newspaper in her hands, her voice trembling with anger. "Who are you? Who are you really?" Jack's eyes flickered to the paper. He exhaled slowly and shut the door behind him. "So you found out?" Jennifer's chest tightened. "You're a missing billionaire, and I married you without knowing any of this?" Jack met her gaze, the usual amusement gone from his expression. "I never lied to you, Jennifer. I just didn't tell you everything." Jennifer let out a bitter laugh. "Really? Because I remember you letting me believe you were just some regular guy from East End." Jack was silent for a moment before pulling out a chair and sitting down. He rested his elbows on his knees, looking straight at her. "I left that world because it consumed me. When my father was arrested, everyone turned on me. Friends became strangers, family only cared about money. I was tired of being seen as a walking bank account." Jennifer swallowed hard. Jack's voice dropped lower. "I didn't want someone to love me for my wealth. I wanted to know if there was anyone out there who could love me just for me." Jennifer's breath hitched. "So I was just a test? A social experiment?" Jack shook his head, his gaze holding hers. "No, from the moment I met you, I knew you were different. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't care who I was, and you stayed." Jennifer looked at him, torn between anger and something far more dangerous, the terrifying urge to believe him. She had spent her whole life being betrayed. But now she wasn't sure if she could trust the one person who had made her feel safe. The worst part? Some part of her still wanted to. Jennifer felt betrayed. First, it was Andrew, the man she had once loved, who had humiliated her on their engagement night. And now it was Jack. He might not have cheated on her the way Andrew did, but he had lied. And Jennifer had no room left in her life for lies. She didn't say another word. She simply turned, opened the door, and walked out, ignoring Jack's voice calling after her. London's rain poured down in heavy sheets. Her thin sweater was soaked within minutes, her hair clinging to her skin, but she didn't care. She just kept walking, not knowing where she was going, only that she needed to get away from Jack. She had thought he was a new beginning, a life without deception, without power games, without people who only cared about money. But now she realized even Jack had secrets. She had trusted him. And now, once again, she was just another fool standing alone in the rain. A week passed. Jennifer didn't go back to East End. She stayed in a small hotel near Westminster, not the luxury hotel she used to frequent, but a quiet space where she could think. Should she go back to her old life? Would her parents even accept her if she returned? Or had she really lost everything? And yet, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop thinking about Jack. His stupid smirk, the way he teased her in the kitchen, the way he tossed his jacket over her shoulders when it got too cold without saying a word, the way he looked at her, not as an heiress, not as a financial asset, but as a person. And that hurt more than anything else. Until one afternoon, she received a message. Jack Morgan, tonight, 8 p.m., the Shard rooftop. I need to talk to you. She was going to ignore it. But at 7:45, she found herself stepping into the elevator of London's tallest building. When she stepped onto the glass balcony of the Shard, she saw Jack waiting. He stood beneath the hazy London sky, dressed simply in a white button-up, hands in his pockets. But his usual smirk was gone. He looked serious, hopeful. He gestured for her to come closer. "Thank you for coming." His voice was quiet, uncertain. Jennifer crossed her arms. "What do you want, Jack?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he knelt down. Jennifer froze. Jack pulled out a velvet box. Inside, a diamond ring sparkled under the city lights. Jennifer Aniston. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. "Marry me, not because of a drunken mistake, but because you choose me. This time, for love." Jennifer's breath hitched. She could run. She could say no, but she didn't want to. She knew it the moment she held out her hand. Jack smiled, sliding the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms. Rain misted over them, London skyline glittering below. This time, she had no doubts. She had chosen him.